Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Sidney Sachs, and today I'd like to welcome Mike Karsen. Welcome, Mike. I'm so glad you could come and join me today. Mike's going to talk to us about writing a family history. And that's, of course, something once we've done a little research and found our families and a little bit about them, we want to write a little bit about them. So what's the main message that you have for genealogists that want to write something?
Well, my main message is to do it now. I have this one lecture that I'll be giving this afternoon in Washington here to the Jewish Genealogical Society of Greater Washington. And my message is to write it now. I've been giving this message for about 3 or 4 years to genealogy societies across the country and specializing in Chicago. And I usually start the lecture and say, well, who here has published something? You know, how long have you been doing genealogy? 10, 20, 30 years. A lot of people have been doing it for quite a while. How many people have published something? And usually I get somewhere between 10 and 20% of the people raising their hand. And my point to them is that you should start publishing something now. Don't wait till you get everything, till you get your genealogy done, which is impossible, of course, to finish it. Do something now and start writing it, and you can continue doing research, but if you don't start publishing it, what's the good of doing all this work? So
talk to me.
It's a main thing is to do it now and get started on it, and then part of my methodology, which we'll talk about as we go on, is how to do that in a meaningful way.
So what is your basic approach to it then?
Well, my basic approach is divided up into small pieces. Don't try and say, I have to write my whole family history, because that, again, is overwhelming. So you divide it up into smaller pieces, branches of your family, periods of time, and try and do something that's manageable. One of my books that I'll talk about is about one of my grandmother's family, and it's only their immigrants came to America around 1900, and they're from Romania, and I couldn't really have much luck in researching Romania. They weren't very open with the records there. It's still a difficult place to get help, but I just did it from 1900 to the present, writing biographies and other information about my family. In this book here, the Markovitz Family History, it's over 80 pages, and it's just talking about basically coming to America, their life here, and biographies of the family, my grandmother and her siblings, where they settled, and all the other genealogical information, their arrival records, and all that. And if you just do that, I think what the problem is sometimes genealogists, we forget how much information we have. If you have to go back. What I tell people to do is go and look at what you have again, because if you've done this, I know I haven't been doing it for that long, but people who looked at their records, I had stuff in there that I already forgot about that I had found 5 years ago, documents and information. So if you just go back, instead of always looking for new, we're always looking for more and more, just go back and see what you have and see if you can carve out something, but do something meaningful and get started on it now.
Now, did she, for instance, come as a child in 1900, or did she come as an adult, or?
Well, my grandmother came at age 18, so she was an adult by today's standards of what she came by herself. She was the first one. She was the oldest daughter. She came by herself to the east side of New York and started working there, and then we had chain migration. And one of the things I do in the book is I show you how she came, then her brother came, then the father came, that normal chain migration with all the Ellis Island records.
Except it's unusual for a girl to travel by, or less usual for a girl to travel by herself than for the males to come first.
Right, that's a little unusual, because they didn't welcome women by themselves. They had to make sure that they had some safe place to go. So I don't know exactly what story she gave them. She had a friend in the east side of New York, and she went there and started working hard as a seamstress in the clothing industry. That
seems to be a lot of history. History of a lot of people is the clothing industry in New York. And then you have another one here. Do you want to mention that one while we're at it? This is another family?
Yeah, this is the Yankelovich family. This is my late wife's family, who came originally from Belarus, from the Minsk gubernia, we say, and they went to London, and then the family went on from London, they went one branch went to Australia, one group came to Chicago in around 1920, and then there's still quite a family in London, so it's kind of coming across, a journey across 3 continents. So that's another major work. I've done 4 major family histories, and that's why.
For each of your grandparents? Or for
I've
two of your grandparents and two of your wives?
No, I've done 3 of mine and one of hers. So that's, and these, I've taken about a year to do each one of these. So it's a major task once you get started, but again, there's still a lot more to do, but it's good to it's important to get started on as soon as possible.
Now, did you run into any family members that didn't want something published about them, or did the family members know that you were doing this, or cousins or whatever?
Yeah, actually, I haven't had any objections. I had one aunt that never wanted people to know how old she was. She said, you know, the people she played cards with, if they knew how old she was, they wouldn't associate with her. But she didn't really object. I mean, it's a little hard in the family history to hide your age when you have, you know, 3 older sisters and 1 younger brother. So she didn't really object. I mean, I have another thing. Sometimes when I do these lectures, people ask me about, what about sticky issues, you know, if there's divorces or other bad things that happen in a family. And I kind of give them, my general answer to that is that I'm doing these family histories to bring the family together. So if there's some issue that people are unhappy about, you don't want to say that the person was in jail or what the cause of the divorce was, whose fault it was, then I just I have a cop-out strategy. Is I don't try and cause problems. I don't want to publish a book and then say, okay, now half of the family is mad at Mike because he talked about how Grandpa deserted the family or whatever that story was, and we don't think that's exactly true. I do this to bring the family together. So if there's something that people object to that would cause a major issue in the family, I try and cop out of it. Sometimes I say it in a kind of a coded way, like I had a cousin who was actually a gangster in Chicago, so I put he was actually a purchasing agent. He was the one that bought the guns for Capone, so I called him purchasing agent, and the people who knew what he did and knew his role, knew what it was. But the other people, then my cousin objected to me calling him gangster, his occupation. She didn't like that. So
your family does look at it before you do the final publication, and you sort of get
I share it kind of on an evolutionary basis. I don't send it to everyone all the time, but I send it to the people who knew most about these sections to proofread, because a lot of what I do is biographies of my ancestors, especially like my grandparents and great-grandparents. So I'm getting a lot of input because a lot of those folks I never knew. I've written biographies in this book about people that I never even existed. We never knew existed before we started
doing genealogy.
Genealogy. So writing a biography is, people say, well, how can you write it? Well, you interview people and get their inputs, but then I have to, especially in those cases, I go back to people and see if hopefully they have more information that they forgot to tell me. That's the other part of getting their review.
And your family, other than your immediate family, are they glad you're doing this, or don't care, or?
Well, in all families you have people who are interested, and then you have people who seem not to care at the moment. So I do it for the people who care and want to share it with their kids. And sometimes the other people will get it. You know, my kids kind of look at it, but they're not quite that interested in it yet. This is a thing, of course, as people get older and life goes on, they appreciate it more. But I have one cousin, and this is kind of my favorite comment. He says he has the book on his coffee table, instead of Paris from the Air or some other nice picture book, he has the family thing on his coffee table, which is a nice thing, because the other thing I do have a lot of photos in it. One of my other advice to people is, if you're writing a family history, you need to have photos of people, documents, things of where they lived, a lot of graphics, because otherwise it's pretty boring. You could read the Washington D.C. phone book or New York City phone book, and it could be as interesting as some family histories I've seen that just have names, dates, and places, and people aren't interested. So I kind of make that an imperative.
Well, you seem to do that as well. I mean, you do list all of.
Oh yeah, of course I have all the data, but
you have a lot of writing along with it to cover it and to.
And put documents in there.
You have a family group sheet, for instance, for each descendant of the.
This book focuses on it was my late wife's grandmother's generation. So each of her siblings, she had 6 siblings, each of them, and we found the photo of every one of the children.
Oh, that's nice.
So these people were born, you know, starting in the 1920s and 1930s, and now we have a photo of all those. So that took a lot of work, and it's not normal genealogy, but that's something that people really appreciate when they can kind of look, and then these people are really alive. They really lived, rather than just name and dates.
It's nice to have a picture of the person to get it, rather than just the name. And I noticed that you did have on that page I just showed, you had the pictures. Well, obviously people have sent these pictures to you because I saw a bunch from Perth and so on.
Oh, no, well, we had to go to Perth.
Oh, you went there, okay.
So the other fun part, of course, of doing genealogy and the family histories
is to get to travel.
Is to get to travel. Perth, Australia is about one of the farthest places you can go because it's on the west coast of Australia. So it was, you know, like 14,000 miles from my home. So it was quite a journey.
Fantastic trip. I hope you got to do some sightseeing while you were there.
Oh yeah, we did a lot of sightseeing. But the family actually was probably the high point of the trip because they welcomed us. No one had been there for 25 years from the American family. So if you really can get into this and create experiences while you're doing your family history, then you're not just sitting at the National Archives cranking microfilm all day. There is living people in genealogy, not just dead people.
Yeah. Now, do you also have a book that tells people how to do this? Did you write something like that, or is that just what you do in your lectures?
No, I haven't written the book yet on that yet. I have an idea about a cookbook approach to doing family histories, but I haven't quite gotten. I have actually two lectures I do. I do one which is called Write Your Family History Now, which is trying to give it some urgency and tell people to do it and give them a kind of it's a 1 hour view, and then I have a 2 hour lecture which kind of is more extensive. It's on the same line, but how to do each section, how to do biographies, how to do historical context, writing the story of part of what I have in the books, which turned out very interesting to me, is someone asked me when I wrote my first book, like, how did you do all this? You know, they were kind of like, how did you find all this information? So now I kind of journal when I'm doing the family history and when I made a breakthrough. When we went to Australia, we take photos of all the people we met along the way, and that turned out to be very meaningful, especially to me, to kind of remember what I did, but it also shows people kind of the process of how you have to do the genealogy, and not just sitting at the computer in your home in your jammies clicking on Ancestry.
How did you find the family in Perth? Or was there a family lore that some went to Australia, or how did you know to look down there?
Well, we always knew that there was family there, and one of my wife's cousins had been there 25 years ago, and she still had contact with them. So she was a valuable resource in making contact, and then through the miracle of email, we found one of the cousins actually lives in the United States, actually lives in the Washington, D.C. area here, and he introduced us to his sister, and they paved the way. They put us up there, showed us what to do, took us around, had a number of family gatherings, so it was a wonderful experience. But genealogy is detective work, so you just have to ask one person, and one of my favorite questions is when I'm meeting someone, say, who else might be able to help me? So when one cousin, you get everything you can from her or him, then you say, well, there's another cousin somewhere else, and that kind of leads to a very nice story and kind of the way a good detective works in this area.
That helps if you have a lot of cousins.
You have to find them.
I don't have any. Everybody, well, anyway.
Okay.
So what kind of special offer to genealogists concerning writing their history?
Well, I have a new thing that I just dreamt up this year, and what I've done is I put my books, after I give my lectures, sometimes people would come up to me and they'd say, oh, can I have a copy of your book? Not so much that they're interested in my family, but they're trying to use the templates, the examples, to pattern their work after. And so now I've put them on a CD in PDF format, and actually I put both of my lectures on there. One I actually have audio for, and one just, and what I'm offering to genealogists, because again they would come up to me and say, Mike, I'm really inspired, I'm going to do something. But then I would never hear from them again, and I'd say, did you do it? Did my trip to Boston pay off? Was it worthwhile or not? And so now what I'm doing is kind of, I have a pledge card, and when I say, if you pledge, you know, I get them when they're hot, when they're inspired, I say, if you do something, and the other thing I want to do is, whatever they do is good. So it doesn't have to be what I did, it doesn't have to be what someone else did. Do what you think you're comfortable with. If you don't have the graphics thing, write it out by hand. I don't care what you do, but share the information. So if you do something with it, pledge within a year, I'll give you the CD ahead of time. So as a guide, as a remembrance, but kind of an exchange. And genealogists are very high ethical people, and so
you'll get it back.
They'll do something. I want the feedback. Someone, already wrote to me that they had done something after my lecture. So they're very good people, but I'm just trying to put them over the edge to get them to do something, because again, my whole point is that people are doing all this work, but it's sitting on their file cabinets, in their computer, and not getting out and not shared. So part of the blessing, the legacy that you can leave for your family is lost by not doing something.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that so much sits. I mean, I found, after my mother died, I found things that I had been looking for about my great-great-grandfather, and they had been in a little box with her high school records or something like that. And she knew I was doing the genealogy, but that, my family didn't care about it, and therefore they were not terribly forthcoming on that. But there were reasons they just wanted to forget everything, which is true of so many immigrants, that they, I think the first generation doesn't talk to the second generation too much, and it's by the third generation that people start turning back and coming, why did they leave 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 60 years ago? And we want to know now, but they so often had to leave family. Like you said, your grandmother came. This was your grandmother or great-grandmother?
This is my grandmother.
Grandmother. That she came by herself?
She came by herself.
And if she came and she had lost siblings because of a program or something, she didn't want to talk about it. I don't know how your grandmother was, but I found that with others, they didn't want to talk about it, and so much got lost.
Yeah, well, because it was very hurtful, especially a lot of them, if they didn't lose anyone then, they left their parents. My great-grand, they left their parents, their siblings. My other grandmother had 3 brothers, and we don't know what happened to them. I traced back the records there. So, but she left, and her sister came to Chicago. But they had 3 other brothers who were in Zhytomyr in Ukraine, and whatever happened to them and her parents. I have a photo with her with her parents, but whatever happened to the parents. So she left them, and they never saw them again. So that. To talk about that is very painful. Yeah,
I think that was true of so many of the first generation. That's why so much of that got lost in there. And I guess your reaction, you said to your message, was that some people came and said they wanted to do it and haven't carried through. Or so hopefully that your CD will help them carry through on that. And what else can you tell me about the stories? Now, you said you used Family Tree Maker?
Yes, right. I always say that I don't work for Family Tree Maker. I'm not getting any bonuses or commissions, but they have, another software has it, but they have a publishing facility that sometimes people don't even notice because there's so many things to press, where you can actually create the whole book. These whole books come out of that section, and you build it one section at a time, whether it's a family group sheet or a biography. They have like a text processing system where you can insert photos, kind of like Word.
Build right into it.
Build it. And the good thing about it, and one of the other things I promote in my lectures, is to do one section at a time and kind of an a la carte approach. So you can build your family group sheets. Do that. Build those pages. Maybe see if you need more photos. Work on those. Then if you want a biography of your grandmother, you can write that, or her siblings, or a little bit about the history of the town where they came from, or where they lived when they first came to America, or whether they were farmers in Tennessee, or whatever that life was. And do those in small modules and kind of do the book one bite at a time. Don't think of it as a continuous novel where I've got to think of the whole story and write it and kind of weave it together. I do it I call it an a la carte approach, where each section really stands almost on its own.
Now, all of this would be in your Family Tree Maker?
Yeah, everything here. And see, at the end, you can print it out. You can create a PDF file.
Again, this is just to show that you can't read that on television, but just that you have a long description about the person and tell a little bit about him in addition to...
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I try to, one of my other themes of in my lectures is to capture as much as you can about, I'll say, your recent ancestors. I'll say your parents and your grandparents, while the extra knowledge is available when you know the insights of what kind of people they were, how they dealt with the holidays, were they religious, what was your grandfather's job, did he own a tailor shop, and try and put some flesh on the bone while there's still people alive that can remember that stuff and not just worry about going back. This is a little sacrilegious for genealogists. We always, when I say, how many generations back can you go? I say, have you written the story of your grandmother?
Yeah.
And your mother, if she's, well, she could still be alive or she's gone. So they're remembered because 100 years from now, they'll be totally forgotten. Can you name your great-grandparents? Do you know anything about them?
Yeah.
But kind of seize the moment now and find people who knew them, talk to your first cousins, get their view, because everyone sometimes has a different view of their grandmother depending on what age they were, where they are in the family.
Usually grandparents seem very old to you.
Yes.
I hate the thought of my granddaughter thinking that I'm really old, but I know to her I am. What's your website again for anybody that wants to look at your website? I'm sure you have some of this information on the website too.
Well, it's simple. It's www.mikekarsen.com, and that's really kind of the portal into mostly what I do is lectures, but there's also links to other site I have on Jewish research, especially in Chicago, and other links to resources in this area.
Have you done something on your site, like to tell them how to do something like that, or basic, or outline it all, or anything like that?
I don't have anything yet really published as a book or a manual. I just want people to come now if they have an idea that they want to do something. If they'd write to me, I would send them their lecture if they're willing to. If I've inspired them by this program, or they want to get more insight, email me. The best thing you can do is someone listened to this show and got an idea of it. So I'm glad to answer your emails. It may not be the first day, but I answer every email of somebody who's interested in doing a family history, because this really, I've done 4 books, but my goal is to spread the word. Spread the word and get people to really publishing, and then I can feel good about my efforts and what I've done. It will be multiplied over and over again for many families.
When you say, to have pictures of the old places, when I was in Germany a few years ago, my aunt and my cousin took me to Marburg, and my aunt said, "That's the house that your mother lived in," because I guess she'd lived with them for a while. And so I took a picture of it and brought it home to my mother, and she said, "That window wasn't there when I lived there." And she only lived there, well, she was born in 1906, so she lived there until the First World War. So she was very young, but she knew exactly, that window wasn't there. They must have added that. So it was really interesting. It was interesting to see her reaction to it, too. And surprising that the building was still standing despite the war. So it's something like that, when you have something that goes with the older person. Right,
yeah. I mean, in my approach, like your trip to Germany, I would put a section in there. So it doesn't quite fit the family history, but it's interesting, you want to share it. So journal what you did. I'm sure you took a few photos.
Oh, yeah.
and put that in, and your mother's comment afterwards that window wasn't there. That's great stuff to share and record and pass on, and not just have it in your own personal collection. Share it with the family. You may not want to put 1,000 slides of your trip in there, photos, but the important ones that the family's interested in. Where is this place? Yeah. Put a map of it in there, because again, those are things that sometimes family hear of these towns, but where exactly is that? Gee, even the young kids might be interested in where it is on the map.
Yeah, sometimes, but my kids are interested, but they're not interested in doing any of it. So, but at least they listen to when I talk occasionally. So what else can you tell us? Well, we've got a couple of minutes left.
Okay. The other thing that I kind of brushed on is the way to do it. Again, my idea is to make it as simple as possible. So when people come, I say, divide your family into 4. I said these books are about 3 of my grandparents. But when they say, well, how do I do my family history? Okay, pick one of your 4 grandparents, the one that's you have the most information on, or you grew up with, you have the most empathy for, whatever that is, and do that family history. What I mean is you take that grandparent and you go back as far as you can, back their line, and then come forward again, and that becomes like 1/4 of your family. The other thing I found is that when I do my books then, I send it to people only who are related. I once attended a lecture, and the person said, well, I wrote my family history, but what it was is both sides of his line. So if people got the book, they said, oh, well, that's Mike's father's family, that's not us.
Yeah.
So they had to sort through. But when my family gets this, I say, everyone in there is related to you. And so it's also, plus, obviously it saves paper, it's easier to do. So that's my basic message again, is simplify what you do, take a small bite, do something, don't worry about doing it perfectly, don't wait till you have all the information, all the mysteries solved, you know exactly the exact date your grandmother was born.
You can always make a revision of it later.
You can make a revision, and some of these things that we get stuck on genealogists because we want to find that exact date in the big picture don't make the story different. You know she was born around 1884. You have a rough idea.
So if it's May 5th or 6th, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all what those dates are. So that's sometimes in our perfectionism to solve that mystery, we get caught up in minutia.
I want to say our website again is tracingroots.nova.org, and we'll have links to your website, and from there they can go on further from that. So tracingroots.nova.org. If there's anybody's interested, and we'll have a link to you and your email address on there as well, I'm sure. Well, it'll have the link to it. So thank you very much for coming. I think we've learned a lot about writing the history, and there's certainly a good approach to it. So thank you very much, Mike.
Okay, thank you.